For those of you who don't know and can't tell, I am expecting a baby. And expecting a baby has made me super aware of my pelvic floor. And let me tell you, it is just a game changer when it comes to singing. If you don't understand your pelvic floor and how to access it, how it works, and just the way how to contract it and how to relax it and even how to lengthen it, you're gonna not have as fun of an experience singing as you could. Your pelvic floor is really, really key in this broader concept of what we often refer to as breath support. So in this video, I am breaking down how to access your pelvic floor, how to contract it, how to relax it, how to lengthen it, and then we're going to talk about how we want to use it for singing. So first of all, let's demystify some concepts pertaining to the pelvic floor. Number one, men, you have one also. I know sometimes we really associate pelvic floor stuff with women, and it's true, right? Like the reason I'm thinking so much about it is I'm about to have a baby. Pelvic floor is really important in all of that. So we tend to emphasize the action of the pelvic floor in the female body, but men, you've got pelvic floors too, and they are just as important in your body as it is in my body, okay? So that's number one. Number two, so your pelvic floor is really the very bottom layer of muscle in the bowl of your pelvis. If you're not sure at all what your pelvic floor is or how to experience it, it contracts when you do a Kegel exercise. And again, men, you can do Kegels too. If you don't know what a Kegel is, it's usually most people describe it as if you were trying to stop the flow of urine, right? Those are the muscles that you would engage to stop that. An image that I really like to kind of get a little bit more specific about activating the pelvic floor is I like to think about the tailbone, the sitting bones, which are the two sort of bottom bony bones of your pelvis. And if you just if you're sitting down and you kind of feel your butt bones, right, that touch your chair, you've got one on each butt cheek. So it's tailbone, the two sitting bones, and then the pubic bone. Think about all of those bones kind of gathering toward one another. Your pelvic floor in contraction would be responsible for that action, right? And I'm kind of exaggerating it in my own body. You can see everything kind of squeezing in and up as I contract my pelvic floor, okay? So if you're not familiar with how to contract your pelvic floor, let's try that a couple times. And we're gonna do that with a breath. So you're gonna exhale like you're blowing out a candle. As you do that, if it helps to think Kegel, do a Kegel. If it helps to think stopping the flow of urine, think stop the flow of urine. If it helps to think squeeze my tailbone, sit bones, and pubic bone together, think that. Those are the three kind of cues that can help you access that contraction. So let's take a breath in together. Blow out a candle. Contract the pelvic floor. And then breathe in, just let it drop. And then do that again. Breathe out. Contract the pelvic floor. Breathe in, let it drop. Breathe out. Contract the pelvic floor. Breathe in, let it drop. Okay, so in my mind, the real benefit to this exercise is not only the strengthening of the pelvic floor when you contract it, but the ability to recognize what it feels like to release the pelvic floor. If you've seen any of my videos about belly breathing, I take the same strategy. I have you exhale, squeeze the belly, squeeze the belly, squeeze the belly, so that when you inhale, you just release it and air comes into the belly. That's what it feels like anyways. It feels like air coming into the belly. So sometimes it's easier to release a muscle if we have strongly contracted it. So I think that's the real benefit of this exercise, is learning not only how to contract your pelvic floor, but how to release your pelvic floor. So try that a few times until you get this sense of okay, when I exhale, I feel all those muscles engage. And then when you inhale, feel them let go. Feel them drop, right? Feel how the sit bones widen, right? Everything gets a little more spacious sort of in the bottom region of your pelvis. So work with that a few times until you feel really accustomed to what is it like to contract and lift my pelvic floor? What is it like to release my pelvic floor? And my suggestion to you for this exercise is contract on exhale, release on inhale. Okay, so now that you've gotten the hang of what it means to contract the pelvic floor and exhale and release the pelvic floor and inhale, let's just talk for a second about the role of the pelvic floor in breathing in general. So in normal breathing patterns, your diaphragm is here, then your pelvic floor is obviously down here. They move together. When you breathe in, pelvic floor and diaphragm lower, although the diaphragm lowers more than the pelvic floor does. And then when you breathe out, they rise. So they move in parallel motion, like this, in normal breathing patterns. Now, you're probably like, I don't feel my pelvic floor when I'm breathing. You won't, right? Like what we did a moment ago was a really exaggerated version, right? But in general, they move together. Now, here's what I'm going to say for singing. Breathing for singing is all about balance. I do not subscribe to the idea that there is a one-size-fits-all approach for everyone. It sort of depends what your habits are. When we're breathing for singing, we're always looking for balance. We're looking for balance of how much am I exhaling, and then how much am I kind of resisting that for the given note. So this is not a universal truth. However, I find for most people to keep the pelvic floor in a more descended or lengthened position while singing creates more stability in the sound, creates more power and more ease in the singing, because it kind of helps encourage the diaphragm also to not rise too quickly. So when we're singing, we're actually going to do the opposite of what we just did in that breathing exercise. When we exhale, we're going to keep almost slightly pushing down on the pelvic floor like you were going to start the flow of urine. So in some ways it's breathe in, just let the pelvic floor relax, and breathe out, push down on it like you were going to start the flow of urine. And you're like, but when does my pelvic floor just get to like release in general? I mean, it's going to release on the inhale, right? And then you're going to actually kind of push down on it or lengthen it while you sing so that you hold it down rather than letting it rise up with the diaphragm. That's going to create a really nice anchor for you. That's what most people report when I teach them this, is that they feel really grounded. They feel really rooted, and then high notes feel easier. And fun fact, maybe I'll do a video on this later, there's a real correlation between your pelvic floor and your soft palate. So you kind of push down on the pelvic floor and the soft palate lifts, and you get this beautiful vertical space to sing in your body. So instead of feeling like you're kind of singing here, it starts to feel like you're singing a little bit more here. Okay, so coming back to this idea of lengthening or pressing down on the pelvic floor while we're exhaling, we're going to breathe in the same manner. You're going to breathe out like you're blowing out a candle. But this time as you do so, I want you to push down on the pelvic floor. A very, I would say, aggressive version of that is to almost feel like you're going to have a bowel movement. That's more than you need to do. It's really more, what would you do to start the flow of urine? That's that sort of lengthening and pushing down on the more on the front of the pelvic floor rather than on the back of the pelvic floor. So that's what you want to think about. Okay, also I want to put a little disclaimer on this. I am like 8.5 months pregnant, and I've been doing this exercise with people all the time, every day. I have yet to pee myself doing it. So if I'm not peeing myself, you're not going to pee yourself either. But it is sort of the same action of like what you would do to start the flow of urine. That's it. Just want to put that little disclaimer out there. Okay, so you're going to just breathe in. Try to breathe into the belly as best you can. Breathe out, blow out a candle, push down on the pelvic floor. Breathe in, belly expands. Blow out a candle, push down on the pelvic floor. Feel it kind of lengthen. Breathe in. Breathe out, lengthen your pelvic floor. So you will feel like there's a little bit of pressure, but the pressure goes this way, down, rather than this way, up when we were contracting. It's a really different sensation, right? It's just you're moving in the polar opposite direction with that. So once you get the hang of this, right, and I would just couple it with your breath until you feel pretty confident with that action, then you might start to add some pitch to it. So I'm just going to do like a 1-5-1 pattern. As you go to the higher pitch, that's when I want you to be really conscious of kind of pushing down on the pelvic floor, feeling it relax and lengthen versus everything kind of squeezing in and up. Before we do that, one other image I want to give you is that when we contracted the pelvic floor, we thought tailbone, sit bones, pubic bone drawing toward each other. If it's helpful, you can think about all those bones moving away from each other. Like, what would you do to have to force those bones away from each other? Okay, so we're going to try a 1-5-1 pattern and go ooh, as you like, particularly when you go to some higher pitches. See if this doesn't give you an anchor, something to ground you. If you get to a certain point and it feels almost like the sound is too weighty, it's too heavy, and you're having a hard time getting to the high note because it's too heavy, I'm a huge advocate for try one thing and then try the polar opposite, because that's how we figure out where imbalances are in the body. So at some point, you might decide, you know what, let me just try the polar opposite. Let me contract my pelvic floor as I go to that higher note and see if that doesn't kind of give me some really, like, a nice quick gush of air, because that might be what you're needing. So you can try it both ways. Again, I find that most people find this little press down gives them a good sense of being anchored and rooted. But I find when I get really high, like way up here, like a high B, that's when I actually kind of need to lift the pelvic floor. So it's all about balance. Last thing I want to say here is you can configure your body position to really help you access the pelvic floor more easily. So in general, your pelvic floor is going to descend more easily if your legs are open wide, right? So I'm sitting here in my chair and I've got my knees like nice and open. And then in general, it's also going to descend more easily if you have a slight forward tilt of your pelvis. So it's kind of like you're arching your low back a little. You don't want to go too far with that. But if you're like back here with your tailbone all tucked and slouched, that's actually going to contract your pelvic floor and it's going to be really hard to release. So you want to be in a position where your legs are kind of open and your pelvis is sort of tilted forward, and then the pelvic floor can really relax. If you want to get really crazy with it, I love like a horse stance where you just kind of squat down and you sing it this way. Again, anything that kind of opens the legs out this way, you just want to watch for like what I call duck butt. You don't want to be like this when you're in that horse stance, right? You want to be more like this, and that's going to help you access your pelvic floor a little bit more easily. So I hope you guys find that helpful. I really think understanding your pelvic floor, how it works, how to access it, how to lengthen and kind of even press it down slightly can be a huge game changer in your singing. So good luck, you guys. Happy singing.